Well, it's Monday, right? Yeah, it's Monday. How are we today? It's fucking nasty outside once again. So kicking off the second fucking week of working for myself. It's time to get some make some money today. So we got Subframe to put in that escape. But first, before I get going on too many chores and stuff here, I gotta get all this stuff out of the way. We're probably gonna back that thing in here so that way when we drop that subframe out, it'll be easier than working around the front of the vehicle and trying to get all the pieces and parts in. So the hoist project has to get put on hold for a minute because the feller's got to make a couple bucks. I gotta move these tires, I don't know where yet. And then we'll put the pieces and components back underneath the tractor once again because it just seems like a good storage spot for them. So let's get to it. So now I gotta move these pieces. Like I said, we'll store these under the tractor for right now. They heavy too. This one has a pin in it. That one has the pin in the end, so we'll go ahead and drag that out. It's not horrible to get out of there. Well, there you go. Shop's cleaned up. We got an open bay and we got a vehicle to put in it, so let's get to it. Don't mind the wind today. It's not the most pleasant day to be working outside. That's why it's a good day to work in the shop. Oh, come on. That doesn't want to stay in park. Good thing your strap caught it. When the one axle's out, it won't stay in park, so that's enough. Yet enough that we can still drive over it. ...2005 Ford Escape with a busted subframe. This is going to be a project. Okay, so now if we get in here, you'll be able to see right here, the subframe is actually busted completely off, and that front arm is able to swing out. Right now there's two ratchet straps holding the thing together, but it swung out enough that it pulled the axle apart, pretty much splayed the front end out. Some brake lines and that kind of stuff got bent, so we'll be doing a little bit of work there. But the primary thing right now is to see if the bolts will come loose on the subframe to actually be able to drop this subframe out of here and replace it. You got bolts that go into the body. This one's a stud, so that one's not too bad. And then getting the exhaust out of the way. The exhaust runs down underneath the subframe. Yes, it does. So I'll have to take that joint apart there, that joint apart up here, and be able to slide it out. So, and then there's that cross member in it that will have to come loose as well. But my primary focus right now is that bolt and that nut. Make sure those come off. And the nut I'm not too worried about, but that bolt is critical in being able to make this repair. All right, so fortunately, I took a ratchet, a large ratchet, and a socket. I prefer to do that on those versus an impact to make sure that they'll crack loose. That gives you a better sense of feel of it's actually turning or going to twist off, or et cetera, et cetera. On both the bolt and the nut on both sides actually came loose quite nicely. So that's a huge bonus. I'm going to drop the control arm with the subframe, as well as the stabilizer bar and the steering rack. All that's going to come out with the subframe, and then we'll swap the parts over as needed. So my next concern is being able to get the nut off the stabilizer link, nut off the tie rod end, and the pinch bolt and ball joint separated from the knuckle. So that way we can get those separated. Kind of take your, pick the worst battle and tackle that first, and then go down the line. And because that way, if you're going to need additional parts, you'll know it right away. Okay, on the tie rod end here, I like to use a side cutter to get the cotter pin out. Somebody pounded in with a hammer and it didn't actually go through. They just mauled it over, so that's going to be a little bit of an issue. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and shear it off with the nut, because the cotter pin is softer than the nut. It doesn't cause any issues with the thread. So we take the nut off, and then once we have the rack out and the tie rod end's a little bit more accessible, then we'll address that stuck cotter pin from there. Hammer, strike the end of the knuckle. Pop that out. So we already have our stabilizer link removed. You hear that noise? That's the lower socket. I can ask the customer if he wants to put them on now. That's up to him. I can have them available and put them on. In this case, because it's just a nut, don't really charge him much extra labor, but it's easier for him to put the parts on right now than it is to do it later. So just something to keep in mind. We won't reach out to the customer about that until we get this thing tore apart and we know all of the things that are needed. This one's, this lower pinch bolt is being a little bit difficult. It's rusted to where it's not the original size anymore. It's not uncommon for these to break and you have to replace them. It is a through bolt, so in fact, it's already been replaced with a replacement non-factory bolt. So go ahead and get this one out of here. We'll jump over to the other side. Same procedure, remove the nut on the upper end of the stabilizer link, the nut off the tie rod, end strike the knuckle and get the tie rod end out, remove the bolt, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to get the ball joints out. All right, so a little bit of a slight hiccup here. You can see the broken bolt right there. The through bolt, the pinch bolt that goes into the knuckle. I tried to loosen that up. The head snapped off of it. So this side is the threaded side down there. So 2 options. My first option is to strike that threaded side, try to drive it through. Usually that'll work. Otherwise we have to drive it back the other direction using a punch or something like this. Worst case scenario, you gotta get in there with a air hammer and drive it through. Air hammer, I've never had the air hammer not be able to get it out of there. They aren't usually that stuck. So I'm gonna get the hammer, we'll drive that out, and then I'll show you how to get the ball joint out of here. All right, now that you've removed the pinch bolt, we're gonna go ahead and separate the ball joint from the knuckle, and we're gonna do it without wrecking the boot. We're not gonna use a pickle fork. Small chisel like that. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. And a small hammer, and then you're gonna need a larger pry bar. So what we wanna do, hopefully you can see here, is now that we have the tie rod disconnected, we can turn the knuckle to our advantage. I'm gonna move my light so I'm not hitting my head on it. And where that pinch bolt goes through, you can see that little seam right there. Go ahead and stick your chisel in there. And if that knuckle wants to come back a little bit, that's okay. Just a few taps. You don't have to get crazy with it. All you're doing is spreading that open a little bit and aiding in the ability for that to release the stud. It also doesn't hurt to take a little bit of penetrating oil. Go right on the top there. Let her seep in. And then you can come through your pry bar and go up to your subframe. And with some decent downward pressure, hopefully be able to get that to separate. There's also a hole in the middle of the arm that you can utilize in some instances to get that to separate. You can also come underneath. I'll get you in here a little bit better. You can come underneath here between the knuckle and the arm and pry it that direction. That'll work as well. Sometimes it's trying a various amount of things to see what'll work and what won't to release that ball joint and get it out of there. So, okay, so we're at that point where, you know, I've tried a bunch of other things and we're gonna have to go to the more invasive procedure like I told you to separate this. So we took the nut off the axle, we took the pinch bolts out of the strut, disconnected our ABS wire and our brake hose, so we got a little bit of flexibility. But the end of the axle shaft is actually stuck in the bearing. So usually the best method I have for that is take your air hammer. I don't know how much power the air hammer has here on my compressor versus the larger volume at work, but we'll find out. So that doesn't want to work either. Now, there is a puller that you can put over the studs. There's a forcing screw to try to drive it out. Usually that ends up mushrooming the end of your shaft or separating your wheel bearing. So that method's not going to work either. the reality is we're here because things are rusty anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get in here. I'm going to try to sneak this air hammer in. And I'm going to try to sneak it in here at an angle and just at least try to get that to start. If I get it to start moving, then hopefully we can finish it off. I gotta find a place to put everything so everyone can see here. You can see that did start separating the ball joint. It's not completely separated yet. Obviously there's still a stud sticking through there, but so now it's moving pretty good. I think we could probably get the pry bar in there and finish it off. I'm hoping. Put you there for a second. We're a little cluster of tools here, but we're gonna put a pinch bolt back in that strut. Just one to kind of hold everything. We don't want to separate the ball joint or the axle shaft by letting that be the only thing holding on. So we're going to do that number. We'll get back in here again. And we might have to dress up the end with the die grinder a little bit when we go to put it back together, but that shouldn't be a big deal. The junkyard one may come with control arms in it because chances are the junkyard doesn't want to try to get the ball joints out. There. That one's separated. A little experience, a little patience, a lot of patience on this stuff really pays off. Make sure you're estimating accordingly, because otherwise you go back and tell the customer, well, it took twice as long as what I told you it was going to take, so now I got double my price. They're not going to be happy with you. So this side is a little bit different. I have to get the axle out because we have to replace the axle shaft because it came apart. So let's get into it. So thankfully, this side actually slides right apart. And the tone ring comes right off the axle. It's not uncommon for these things to crack. That one's been cracked for a long time. Chances are there was an ABS light on. But you can see the boot's all torn, the axle's damaged from flopping around, so the other end is still in there. And we'll get that out after we get the subframe out of this thing. Trying to be proactive here and putting my tools away as I use them, because otherwise we end up with a cluster of stuff laying around out here. So let me get you down underneath here and show you what's going on. That's the exhaust Y pipe, or flex pipe. Exhaust is laying down. We took the one hanger off. Well, it rusted off. And the drive shaft is disconnected from the PTU. That is 6 Torx head bolts that are T40, T45. It depends on the application. They're different across the range. Take that out, set it down. The Y pipe, that's actually been replaced, so the hardware actually came apart pretty decent. In most instances, you're actually going to end up having to cut that apart, but since it's already been replaced, it was pretty damn easy. We got a little bit of an incident with the junkyard the salvage yard that I was supposed to be getting the subframe from. Decided that they didn't feel it was in good enough condition to sell it to me, so I'm gonna have to go pull one myself, which is fine. It all comes out in the wash, I guess, but hopefully I can get to one that's not completely buried, and I got readily available access to it, and then we can pull a subframe out of it, bring it back here and put it in. So I guess it is what it is. Last thing I have to disconnect before we start dropping the subframe down is that ball joint over there, and I got one bolt left in the steering rack. I am going to try to leave the steering rack in there. Because this is a 4-cylinder application, it does make it a little bit easier to get to the things in the back. There are a few lines that we had to disconnect retainers for. We didn't actually disconnect the line itself. I'll show you that when we start putting things back together. So I'm going to get that ball joint separated. We'll get that last bolt out of the steering rack on the driver's side. It's right where the steering shaft comes into the steering gear. It's a little bit hard to get to in this circumstance, but I think I can get it out of there, and we'll get the subframe out of here. All right, so we have the rest of our bolts removed. The bolts actually came out of the subframe pretty nice. That was a bolt into the subframe. A little bit of rust on the top there where it passes into the body cavity, but it's not terrible. You can see that is the end of the actual subframe. This should be the under the arm. That is the subframe there. It is, to say it's in bad shape would be an understatement. It's surprising for the condition of the rest of the vehicle. There's some rust points on it, but overall it's not terrible. I know the customer stated that he had a rear shock break off and go through the body, and they make a bracket for it to replace that, which is pretty cool. I didn't actually know that, and I worked for Ford for a while, but we don't do a lot of aftermarket stuff. They don't. I can't say we. I don't work for them anymore. So the next step is to drop that subframe down, get it out from underneath the vehicle. I'll probably show you more of the reinstallation process, because getting it out of there kind of sucks, and it's dirty and janky and all that stuff. So we'll get it out on the floor. We'll do an inspection of the other components that we need to look at, and then I can address things with the customer, see if they want to spend any more money, and give them their options. So I'll get that thing out of there and I'll show you what's going on. All right, so there's the front subframe, K-frame. It all depends on the manufacturer and what they want to call it. That's out of there. As you can see, the difference here between that one and that one. I don't know what I'm getting from the salvage yard yet. I called another salvage yard. They do have one. The price is a little bit higher, but versus going to pull one, it's still going to save me time and money on my part. So it's about the same distance to the salvage yard. It's just a few bucks more. It is what it is. Sometimes you just got to eat one. I made zip the stabilizer bar bolts off, and then I'm sure I will need this one as well. I don't know if it's going to come with front control arms or not. Many times it does, because they don't want to risk those bolts not coming out and snapping off, so they just send them with. So we're gonna break that thing down the rest of the way, just the subframe bolts, that front, I don't know if you want to call it a cross member support. There is an engine mount that bolts here, and this bolts to the lower radiator support. So you'll need to take those out as well. And then there's if this vehicle actually has all the shields on the bottom, which is amazing for the year. There's a bolt there. Take that one out. Drop that subframe down, take your time. You have to work it around that, the output flange on the PTU, if you can see in there. I think you can see in there. Yeah, that one right there. You have to work it around that flange. The engine does, because you have 2 of the 4 engine mounts disconnected, unbolted, you'll be able to rock that engine back and forth. Just take your time, go easy. It'll come up over the top of it. So that's subframe removal on a 2005 Ford Escape with a 2.3 liter. The subframe is the same on a 3 liter, but the removal procedure is going to be a little bit more difficult because you can't work from the top as well as you can on a 4-cylinder. The V6 is much more difficult to get to the things from the top. You're probably going to have to take more things apart. The air filter assembly, possibly the upper intake manifold, and things like that to be able to get to the mounts and stuff in the back. And yes, this job would be much easier if I had a hoist, but we got to make the money to get the hoist. So there you go. If you guys like what I'm doing, throw me a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't, ring the bell, get my notifications. Memberships are down there if you want one, and I do appreciate it because it helps out on the channel. We'll see you guys again next time.